Ever wondered how mixing gouache and watercolor could completely change the feel of your artwork? I used to think these two mediums were pretty separate, but after trying them out and trying the gouache and watercolor, I discovered how they can work together in ways I didn't quite expect. Today, I'm sharing my journey of experimenting with gouache and watercolor mixed media. Well, I hope you can call it mixed media, not too sure as they're quite close, and how it's transformed my art practice. So I started painting with watercolor back in 2020, and it quickly became my go-to medium. But it wasn't until December 2021, while visiting my in-laws in Edinburgh, Scotland, that I first tried gouache. I picked up some Winsor & Newton gouaches from the local art shop, and my world of painting kind of grew. It expanded in a whole different way. Let me walk you through how I started using gouache, what I learned, and how I've been blending it with watercolor in my artworks. My first piece using gouache was painting while I was in Singapore, right after returning from that trip. It was a dark forest scene with a moth painted in gouache as a way of processing my emotions. At the time, my son had been hospitalized at just 9 months old, and it was quite a heartbreaking experience for me because I had to see him, the needle in his arm while he got the IV done for his whole body for hours. It was hard for me. Then back at my in-laws' home, I painted a sculpture of birds that they had in their hallway, which I absolutely love. And I painted the left side using gouache and the right side with watercolor. It was an interesting exercise to really compare the two. While they share the same binder, Arabic gum, gouache is more opaque thanks to its higher white pigment content, which makes it feel a bit thicker and more versatile than watercolor. It was a great way to see the similarities and differences side by side. So I really recommend you try this as well. Next, I tackled a painting of my father-in-law entirely in gouache on a canvas. It reminded me a lot of oil painting, which was actually my first love in art before I discovered watercolor. What I loved about gouache, or what I do love about gouache, is how it allowed me to lay down thick, textured brushstrokes, something that's harder to do with watercolor. Plus, gouache works really well on canvas, which watercolor typically rejects. I tried this painting once of my son, and when I lay down that watercolor, the canvas rejects the water. It's amazing how this happens. And that was a big plus for me, that I was able to use gouache straightforwardly on the canvas. From there, I started playing around with combining the two. I began using gouache as a background, so I would paint the portrait with watercolor, and whatever background, I would use gouache for it. I used black for the clothes of what Billie Eilish was wearing in a portrait. And as you know, black in watercolor is not so thick. So gouache really helps in that way to make it very matte and solid. So I like that look of it. So I use black in that way. But also just having like a gouache background really helps. There's another piece I created of my son that I used gouache for the background. And also, when I kind of paint watercolor for the portrait, I kind of mix in some gouache here and there. That's really nice as well. Or I'll basically use the gouache at the end of a portrait just to give it that more thicker brushworks, which I love as well. But so far, my favorite is this piece where I used the watercolor for the portrait, and then I used the gouache for the flower elements that I painted on the left. Because it's more opaque with white pigment in it and it's more thicker, it just gives that this is like a different area, like it draws the viewer's attention to those flowers, which I really love. Right now, I'm still experimenting with how gouache and watercolor interact, but one thing is certain. Together, they can give a painting that extra, punch. Gouache adds depth, vibrancy, and texture to my watercolor pieces, and it's exciting to see how they continue to complement each other as I test new techniques. So if you're an artist who loves experimenting with mixed media, what have you combined in your work that gave you unexpected results that you love? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And if you've never tried gouache before, do you think it could elevate your watercolor pieces? Let me know. Okay, till next video, take care. Bye bye.